welcome once again to Living in the 21st Century. Joining me today is Dr. Judy Magidson. Dr. Judy, it's a pleasure to have you on Living in the 21st Century. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, just educate the public to who you are?
Sure. I am Dr. Judy Magidson, but I like being called Judy. I'm an informal person with a formal background. I had received an undergrad degree from Boston University. And as I was just saying, that I started off when I was 17 years old going to Boston University School of Ed and wanted to do elementary education teaching initially. And then two of my uncles passed away within 6 weeks of one another. And I saw my family becoming obviously distraught. So was my sister, so was I. So chemistry I would have flunked anyway, no excuse. I just couldn't do chemistry. But the other classes I knew I could handle, but just couldn't. So I flunked out of BU and felt awful and stigmatized. And then I went to night school, summer school, and then I did everything I could, had tutoring, and got into LaSalle College. And I graduated from there, and I kept moving forward. And I then went to more summer school. I went to School of Education, Boston University again, graduated from there, and kept going and got my master's at Northeastern in reading specialization education, and then went on and became a doctorate student at at Boston University, graduated from there, and then was made president of their honor society, and I met this gentleman who was the chairman of the ed department. Every time I saw him, I said, "What do you have for me? What do you have for me?" And I kept persevering. And ultimately, I became coordinator of all of the 12 study skills teachers. And I held meetings and went to every committee meeting, everything, and did everything I could in that program. And persevere, even though there were struggles, and I just kept on pushing forward. And that led me to my writing, which we can get into at a later time when you wish.
Sure. Well, Dr. Judy, you are inspirational. And one thing I would like to ask you is tell us a little bit, because I can recall you told me that you were writing on Elvis Presley a little bit. So take us into that world and give us an insight to what your book is all about.
I'm glad to do that. So I've always been a writer. I had an older sister, 3.5 years older, and I was envious of her always doing homework, and I wanted to do homework when I was a little kid. So I would, in those days, we didn't have, Google, but we had encyclopedias, and I opened up encyclopedias and I started reading and started researching and started writing. So I was very young when I started writing, and I wrote more formally as I got older, haiku, poetry, short stories, etc. And so now fast forward, and it was the pandemic and everybody was in lockdown, and I was just on my phone like everybody else and just being bored, and a picture of Elvis Presley came across the internet. And I started thinking, what is it about this individual that captured so many hearts and so many minds for so many years? And I thought, what is it about this person? My daughter, who is now 25, was 2 years old when she first was introduced to the music of Elvis Presley, and she loved the music. And to this day, she still listens to his music. So I started researching and read a book from one in particular, from a teacher who had taught in Western Massachusetts, and it intrigued me. And it was about Elvis's Jewish roots. And I thought, that's interesting. I never knew he had Jewish roots. And I am Jewish, so I thought, okay, I'll read a little further. And it turned out that he did have Jewish roots. His mother, when he was very young, sat him down. And in those days of the Deep South and segregation, unfortunately, and racism, she did sit him down. She said, "You should know." The way she said it was, "You have Jewish blood." Well, of course, I know if you prick our fingers, same color blood, but this is how
Absolutely.
his mother interpreted. And then she said, don't tell anybody because people look unfavorably upon Jewish people. But your great, I believe it's two great grandmothers, Nancy Berdine came from Lithuania. She was Jewish. She had a daughter, Martha Tackett, who had two sons and a daughter. That daughter had a daughter who was named Octavia. Octavia was Elvis's grandmother. And that was Gladys's mother, and they called her Doll. And she said, just don't tell anybody, don't even tell your daddy. So he said he was always ashamed at and embarrassed by being, having Jewish ancestry until he became older and started reading about all different philosophies and religions and felt quite aligned with Judaism. But he was brought up in the Assembly of God Church, where his dad was a deacon, and he loved the gospel music, and he was studying, Pentecostal religion as his parents. So he had both. He had Christianity and he had Jewish, interest. So how I got started was that way. And then I contacted the author and I said, I'd love to do a documentary on this background. So we spoke for over an hour. She connected me to a woman who hosts a show. She's from California, but she hosts a show in Israel. And I spoke with her and she said, yes, she's done documentaries. Let's work. So we started, and she had me send everything from the archives of Elvis Presley, all of his music, little video clips, everything from the 50s, 60s, and so forth. And then we bumped into a wall because somehow, and I don't know technically, but Sony has ownership over the music, and EPE is Elvis Presley Enterprise, a large corporation. They would not release rights for the music, I guess, unless you initiate a project with them. It's a large corporation. So she said, well, you know what? She said, we've come to a wall, but you've been writing little blurbs as you've been sending me pictures. And I said, yeah, I love writing. She said, well, at least start writing chapter 1. I said, chapter 1, what do you mean? I wasn't even thinking of writing a book. And, I wrote academic books. I had written a chapter in a history textbook. I wrote a book for my doctorate degree that's in the Library of Congress, but all academic work. I said, what do you mean? She said, you've done so much research and learning. I'm sure you know about Elvis by now. Start writing. I said, okay. So I wrote, and almost 3 years later, just recently, I completed 36 chapters, my book of Elvis Presley. My niece calls it an historical biography because everything as accurate as I could possibly make it. I mean, I scrutinized everything. I became friendly, had not met him in person, but through the phone and through texting with who he calls his best friend, Larry Geller, who was his guide for all of the spiritual books he gave him and taught him so much about all different kinds of religions, and it opened up Elvis's mind to everything. And he was his hairstylist who stayed with him right through the end. So he has checked me on accuracy. It's interesting. He wanted my chapters one by one. I've sent it out to him. And at one point he said, I like that chapter. I said, great. And he said, but who's Jerry? And I said, Jerry? I said, Jerry met him. Jerry was 12, Jerry Schilling. And Jerry met him at 12, and Elvis was 19, and they played football together, and then he ended up working with him. I said, Larry, what do you mean, who's Jerry? He said, no, you said in that chapter that he worked with Elvis. That was not the year he started working with Elvis. He worked with Elvis the following year. I thanked him and I quickly redid that chapter. So he kept me as honest as possible, So then I decided, okay, I finished my book. I edited it and trying to get it out to publishers. And then I thought, what can I do? I've worked with every population. I taught preschool all the way through college, every age group, every skill group. What can I do with the elderly population? My sister had a form of Parkinson's. I took care of her with my dad, with my family. And for 26 years. But the last 18 years, my dad passed away 18 years ago, and I continued taking care of my sister. She had a short stint in a facility, rehab. So I became friendly with a lot of the residents there. And I thought, I want to volunteer my time. I didn't know what to do, maybe teach knitting. I just didn't know what to do. I wanted to work with that population. So God bless Elvis Presley and my research and my writing. And that brought me to think, I want to do presentations, not a book, not a book pushing, promotional, but just to share things that I learned along the way, all of the fun information about Elvis and how wonderful a person he was. So I started presenting at different facilities. Okay. And I talk about Elvis Presley and all the good that he's brought to our world.
Absolutely. Just one more question on Elvis Presley before we move on.
Of course.
He came up with a lot of religious upbringing, and he was poor. And I would like you to basically briefly explain the transitioning from being a poor religious guy into super mega star in his career. What happened in between there?
He did not think that he would be a superstar. In fact, even when he was a superstar, he didn't think that he was a superstar. He was incredibly insecure, shy, gangly young kid. He was bullied. Kids would throw rotten fruit at him in school. They were very poor. A lot of poor people, of course, during the era of the Depression. He was born January 8th, 1935. So, of course, lots of people didn't have money, but they were very, very, very poor. And he always said he wanted to have enough money so he could help his family. He heard them at 4 years of age feeling distraught, expressing how anxious they were about finances. He said to his parents, when I'm bigger, I'm going to buy you a house and I'm going to buy you a car and I'm going to pay what you owe to the grocery store. And he did. So that was his motive. But he had God-given talent, I feel, that it was natural for him. When he was only 2 or 3 years old, I think about 2, he was in church and he loved the gospel music, and he wiggled off of his mama's lap, excuse me, and he went down in front of the choir, and he started singing along. I mean, he was a baby, but he started moving his hips and moving, and when people said, oh, he was vulgar in the later years, no, he wasn't. That's how he moved innately as a baby, He just loved the music. I feel that the music was inside of him all along, and it came out. His parents also were musical. Even his grandfather was musical. So from there, he made this record. I'm jumping forward, but he finally went to high school. And in high school, they had him join a talent show, like an annual talent show. And he said, nobody really knew that he could sing or play the guitar, which he did all naturally, never took lessons, just small little lessons along the way for guitar, but nothing really. And he said after that, it was almost overnight that everybody, the girls wanted to date him, the boys wanted to be friends with him. Suddenly he was popular. And then fast forward, he went to Sun Studio in Memphis, and he wanted to hear how he sounded on records, so he borrowed about $3.85 or something to make that little acetate record. And then he spoke to the owner, Sam Phillips, and Sam Phillips helped him to get 2 folks together, 2 musicians, a bass and a guitarist, and Elvis had his guitar, and the 3 of them were jamming in Sun Studio one night. And nothing was good for Sam Phillips, but Sam Phillips said, I want to find a person who is white, but with the soul of a black person, who sings like a black person. And if I could find that, that would be extraordinary. Well, Elvis was his man. Elvis sounded all of the rich, wonderful black music from Beale Street, all the jazz, all of the rhythm and blues. He was friends with all of these, musicians, and yet he was white. And so Sam Phillips brought that record that he did, It's All Right, it was called, brought it to Dewey Phillips, a DJ who was no relation, but brought him. He had a show called Red, White, and Blue, a radio show, and he said he's going to play that record. Elvis was so shy and so scared, he set the dial on the radio for his mama. He said, you listen, I'm going to the movies, which he loved going to. So he ran to the movies. He was tucked underneath, in the dark theater, and his mother heard over the radio Dewey Phillips saying, Elvis, if you can hear me, come on to the studio. I want to interview you. Because his switchboard lit up maybe 14 times. People kept saying, play the record again and again. He introduced that song by saying, this is by Elvis Presley. He just graduated from Hume's High School, and he said that because it was a white school. He wanted people to know this is a white performer. And his mother ran down to the movie theater, said, Elvis, you've got to go. And it was then at Chiska Hotel, the radio station. He said, you've got to go. And Elvis said, okay, but I'm not going to be interviewed. He was too scared. Well, he went up there. He was sitting talking to Dewey Phillips, and Dewey asked, how did this all start, and so forth. And then Elvis felt a little calmer, and he said, okay. He said, well, are you going to introduce me? Are you going to interview me? And Dewey said, I already did. He said, what do you mean you already did? He said, I knew you were going to be afraid. I put the dial on. So you've been on the station the whole time. And Elvis couldn't believe it. He said he almost passed out. He was so nervous. But that's how he got started. And then they traveled through the South, crisscrossing states. And little by little, he grew, and it was through lots of hard work and lots of passion and lots of perseverance and lots of nights staying up. And that's how Elvis became more and more known, with the Colonel, who was not really a Colonel, Tom Parker, but that was his name, his label. And he got him all of these bookings, and of course many details that I'll spare you, because I could talk from now until 14 years from now.
Sure. Yeah, so tell me something, at this point in your career or life, rather, what is your immediate means of marketing yourself pertaining to your book, doing services for organizations? Where are you at this point?
I have been on the phone every morning for several hours, making calls to facilities and trying to book myself for presentations to get the word out about Elvis Presley, as I said, not for book promotion, but it sort of is parallel without me even realizing. The residents say, well, when is your book coming out? Is it out? I would love to get it out, because the mission that I have, not that Elvis needs me to defend him, but when I was reading almost 30 books about him, so much I read about him, they put him up as a god. He was not a god. He was a human being. And yet they built such an icon around this individual that he could not feel comfortable being himself. And he wasn't a well person, but he put everything in for his fans. And he was a sickly person, actually, from very young age on. But he fought through everything. He didn't want anybody knowing the private part of him that was in pain. So what I want to do is break through the stigma for politicians, for athletes, for any famous person, musicians, actors, that it's okay to be human. And we as the fans, we as the public, should recognize that we need to know these people are human beings, to allow them to be themselves, but have God-given talent or skills that they have nurtured. We need to know that. So that has been my mission, is to, people said, oh, well, he was into drugs, he got fat. No, he wasn't. He needed prescription drugs, although he was born, sadly, in the wrong decade, because they were giving drugs that they thought for all of his ailments, but it was the wrong drugs. And they weren't watching as carefully as nowadays. So yes, he became addicted, and it was very sad. And, he had lots of challenges, and the press made him out to be who he was. So we, the fans, adored him, but yet we didn't allow him to be human in our adoration, in putting him on a pedestal. So that's my mission, is to push that stigma so that people are allowed to be human and frail and have flaws. So that's one thing. The other is trying to get it out. I would love to get my book published. I would love to get the word out. And I also had made contact with a producer in Canada he did so far about 20 Hollywood films. And he wanted my chapters, and he said it reads like a screenplay. He told me that several times, because my book is not just chronicle information, but I love being creative. So the book is a meld between fiction and nonfiction. So it's a story, but yet telling the story. So it is visual. I'm a visual person, visual learner. So my great idea, and I don't want to give up the dream, is maybe to get it on the screen, get it on Netflix, not because I want to be famous, but because I want a wider body of people to see that Elvis was not a god. He was a human with God-like talent and passion and persevere. He used to say, you can do it, you can do it. And that's what I pass along to the residents in my presentations. And I give them fun stories, how he loved fun. But I also want to show them, you're doing it. You know, these residents are remarkable. They're older, they have health challenges, and they're doing it. And that's what I want to get out, that doesn't matter. You can do it if you want to do it. Just push forward. Just keep pushing forward. So that's what I hope I answered your question.
Yes, okay. So one more thing. Do you think that in the Elvis Presley time, as a young kid growing up, do you see any correlations between him and this younger generation today? I mean, based on what you explained, he was a humble kid, kind of shy and so forth. But today we seem to have a kind of lost generation. That humility is not there anymore. I don't know if because of our changing environment, if it present the same challenges back then as it is now, or that life is far more different now than it was back in Elvis Presley time, and they can have tools at their hand to promote themselves. What do you think is the generation now compared to then?
Very different, I think. I have a 25-year-old daughter, and I have a 32-year-old niece. Very different. I think even though I struggled because, you know, we were okay with finances, not great, but my dad worked very hard. My sister and I were brought up with hardworking dad. Our mom used to say to us, I want to be home. She, you know, I was brought up in the 50s. So in those days, it was kind of rare if the mother worked outside of the home. And she said, I like being home. When you come home with a crumpled piece of paper, I want to be able to see it from school, you know, so she was always there for us. My dad worked very hard as a manufacturer's representative on the road. He wanted to be there for us all the time. So we were brought up that way. And I'm a single parent. I adopted my daughter from birth. My sister adopted her daughter from birth. And when my sister, my niece was 4 years old. My sister came down with a form of Parkinson's. So I became Aunt Mummy. Then I became Aunt Mummy because I did all of the, you know, the work that my sister couldn't do because of her illness, you know, all of the mobility thing. So our kids were brought up differently. However, they had friends and they saw what was going on, and kids sort of, I don't want to say our kids are compassionate, and they really are lovely young women. And my daughter wants to be a doctor and all of this. But I see that there still is more of the technology. Technology is good, but it's the on the phone, the technology can be great, and it can also work against kids. I think parents nowadays set their kids in front of the Kindle or in front of their phones because they need time off. Parents don't involve themselves as much that I've noticed. I mean, I'm not an authority on childcare, but I've noticed a lot of parents say, "Oh, it's so hard there. I can't stand it. I just put them in front of the phone and they're fine. They can be on Kindle. They can watch movies, on the TV. They're not integrated with the kids. The way we were brought up is my parents didn't even think of going on vacation without us, and we were very knitted family. Yes, we had friends, but family, compassion. My mom used to tell us my mother was born and raised in Latvia. And she said her mother would come in the morning. She was the youngest of 5 kids, saying, "Okay, kids, everybody wake up. Who can we make happy today?" And that's how my mother was brought up. That's how she brought up my sister and me. Like, "Oh, we should call so-and-so. I wonder how she's feeling." I've tried to do that with the kids. Yes, they became compassionate adults, but unfortunately, they were in the grip of a different generation, with technology. Quick example, my daughter had a friend when she was about 10 years old staying over one night, and I came into the sunroom and I saw we have 2 couches there, and I saw them both on the phone on different couches. And I couldn't say anything to the guest, but I said to my daughter, "What are you doing?" I said, "Why don't you stop being on the phone? You have a guest. Talk to Sarah." She said, Mama, I am speaking to Sarah." I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "We're texting each other." And they were sitting on the couches, the 2 of them texting one another. That's how they were communicating. So they're unfortunately caught with social media, with TikTok, with all of this. And as I said, it can be fun, it can be interesting, but it can be addictive for people. I think people need to get out